Hello there. Tonight, we climb a narrow path where stones remember footsteps and time leans towards sun. The air is thin and clean the way new paper is clean. Somewhere ahead, a spring keeps its old promise, and beyond it a courtyard waits with lines straight enough to steady your breathing. We are going to Delphi, not to chase thunder, but to learn how questions used to sit down, fold their hands, and become answers without anyone raising a voice. No monsters, no clang of bronze. Just laurel leaves, warm stone, a little incense, and people who knew how to move slowly in rooms that asked them to. We will arrive the way pilgrims did. Wash our hands at the spring, touch a leaf to the water, and share the quiet without trying to own it. The temple is not large, only exact. A lintel with measured shadows. A door that prefers to be opened once. Inside, the light is the color of olive wood, and the air carries a soft breath of smoke that makes every step feel like a word carefully chosen. Someone will bring a small branch of laurel. Someone will lay a ribbon cake on a table where offerings sit shoulder to shoulder, each content to be one among many. Even the floor seems to speak in low tones. Come in, stand here, listen. When night draws around the mountain, we won't rush the answer. We will learn the temple's order first, the tripod that doesn't wobble, the bowl of water that isn't quite still, the priest who knows when not to speak. The wind will pass over the tiles and forget to be urgent. A bell for the hour will sound like a line drawn straight. And while your eyes grow heavy, the story will keep its pace. Slow in, slower out. Like breath, like steps on the sacred way, like a question finding its shape. The mountain stirs before the people do. Light lifts itself in thin layers off the limestone faces of Parnassus, turning the gray to a quiet pearl and then to a shallow gold. Pines hold the last of the night and then let it go. Their needles give out a resinous breath that feels like a slow, kind medicine. Far below, a path, not quite a road and not quite a stair, rises in thoughtful turns toward the terraces where stone learns to stand in order. In the stillness you can hear small, steady sounds that do not hurry anyone. A broom whisking dust from a threshold, the soft clap of a folded cloth against a railing, the little tick of a clay lamp as its wick accepts a flame. Olive leaves in cool air, thyme and rock rose, morning mist that opens like a curtain. Travelers arrive without trumpets. Cloaks show dust from other valleys. Sandals carry the day's first weight onto the sacred way, and hands remember what they have brought. A ribbon cake wrapped in linen that smells faintly of honey. A strip of wool wound around a twig of laurel. A small jug of oil, stoppered with wax, taped with one thin cord to keep the scent close. No one calls out. People speak with gestures that are half greeting and half instruction, the way workmen speak when they know the next action as well as the last. At a low wall, a boy lifts a jar's lid and tips water into a shallow basin. The water makes a round sound and then learns to be still again. A girl unties the cord from the laurel and smooths it with her thumb, not because the branch needs smoothing, but because the gesture draws her mind into the day. Pale stone, cool shadow, laurel leaves holding their darker green under the lamplight. The path asks for a first pause at the spring that has kept its appointment longer than memories last. A conduit in the rock presents a mouth, and from the mouth a clear thread runs without hurry into a trough rubbed satin by hands. The water is not cold enough to startle, it is exact. Pilgrims wet their fingers, touch brow and lips and the inside of the wrists, then let drops fall back where they began. A ribbon is dipped and drawn out. A copper basin stands nearby for what the stream will not drink, and even that basin is quiet. Someone sets a small cup at the edge, and the cup reflects a coin of light that forms and loses itself as the surface is disturbed and then made smooth again. You can smell stone here, and a little metal, and the faint sweetness of fennel stalks that have been dried and leaned against the wall. Water in a long thread, polished trough, breath that lengthens of its own accord. Up the way, The ground turns from earth to paved intention. Each block has been placed to teach the next how to lie flat. The slope tightens, and your calves tell you where you are. A low terrace opens, and with it a view that calms instead of dazzles. Rows of olive groves under a wash of morning air, roofs holding their lines. A farther ridge that is only one shade darker than the sky. A woman unties her sandal and empties a pebble into her palm. She looks at the pebble as if it had spoken and sets it by the path where it can no longer trouble anyone. A man adjusts the strap on a small chest and runs a finger along the seal pressed into the wax. Two boys count the steps between landings and then forget the number at exactly the same place, which is how certain kinds of counting like to be done. Terracotta oil lamp in ready hands. Marble steps wiped clean, a lintel with measured shadow. Before the temple itself, the precinct teaches quiet by example. Porticos repeat themselves in proportions that make the eye agree with the breath. A column carries a weight that looks like thinking rather than strain. At the side stands a shallow table for offerings that do not smoke or bleed, the safe and simple gifts that begin any day on a good foot. Poppy bread with a dust of sesame, a wedge of white cheese wrapped in a fig leaf, a cluster of grapes with the dusty bloom still on the skins, a comb of honey shining even in shade. A priest with a face arranged for calm moves his hand over these things the way a reader moves a hand across a page he already knows by heart. He does not need to taste. He knows what everything will say. Near him a tray holds slender pinches of incense, pale grains that will give up their scent without asking a room to become a theater. The braziers are shallow and quiet, and their smoke does not stain the ceiling. Incense ribbon that rises and thins, laurel bough laid flat, linen folds lined like ripples. The doorframe yields to a cooler room and a different rhythm. Feet forget to echo because rushes on the floor remember the task of swallowing sound. The air is not stirred so much as persuaded to move by hands that know where to place a window and where not to. Light comes from the right and leaves on the left, and in between it shows you what needs seeing without insisting that you see every part. Along one wall sits a plain bench where those who serve today have set their tools in a line that explains itself. A bowl of clean water set a hand's breadth from a folded cloth, a small knife with a handle of olive wood, a basket of ribbons sorted by width and shade, a bronze bell the size of a cupped orange, a scroll case with a leather thong wound twice. You can read the order in the way each thing touches the next. The bell does not ring. It only suggests the idea of a ring when the door moves a finger's width on its hinges. What happens here happens slowly enough to match a heartbeat at rest. A visitor steps to the bench and lays down a cake. The cake is not large and not small. It is the size of a clear thought. A ribbon is chosen that knows how to lie without shrugging. It is tied once, with the knot set to the right where a hand can find it later without looking. The priest touches the ribbon, and the visitor steps back. A second visitor does not lay anything down. He opens his palm to show an object that has been worn smooth by time. An unfigured stone, a coin that no longer remembers the face that was pressed into it, a little bronze hoop. These are not things meant to impress stone. They are items brought to bring the mind into one place, and to admit, by being simple, that most large questions come down to very small balances. A breath is drawn and released. No one counts the breaths, but everyone would arrive at the same number if they tried. No one rushes the idea of answers. The priest crosses to a shallow brazier, tips a pinch of incense, and gives the bowl a small breath with his hand. The smoke climbs, and then remembers to go sideways. Behind him, a curtain conceals a place that can be entered only by the person who will sit later and speak in lines that sound like poems, because poems are the shape that a careful truth takes when it does not want to be pushed. You cannot hear what is behind a curtain, just as you cannot see air learning to warm against stone, but you can infer that there is arrangement there, not chaos, and that the arrangement exists only to coax a certain quality of attention. Tripod silhouette hinted in shadow. A bowl of water that is not perfectly still. A sprig of laurel resting on an arm of bronze. Outside, the day gathers weight, as days do, but the precinct does not concede to noise. A messenger speaks to a scribe in a voice tuned to this place, and not to the marketplace below. The scribe writes a short note, sands it, ties it with a thin cord, and places it with the others where all notes go when they have been asked to wait. You notice how the cord aligns its fibers, how the knot lies, how the tail is cut clean instead of ragged. Everywhere you look, there is an economy that is not stinginess, but rather a habit of treating things as if they were fellow workers. The broom leans with its bristles protected. The ladle is set so its lip does not bruise against the basin. The lampwick is trimmed to a flat oval that burns without smoke. The effect on the body is immediate. The shoulders let go of a tension they had forgotten they were carrying. The face softens as if it had been convinced to trust the next hour. If you stepped outside and walked the terrace, you would find the same order turned toward the view. Cypress in narrow flames, olive in soft domes, a scattering of white stones where someone has tidied the edge of a bed of time. From here the approach road is a line drawn with a patient hand. You can see the little rest places where a wall makes a right angle to catch a bench of shade. You can see the corner where the wind usually turns, and how the builders have set a screen there to teach the air a better route. Farther still, where the world relaxes into fields, you can even pick out the long curve of a river and the two trees that mark a ford. Perspective does not demand that you admire it. It gently informs you that there is room enough for whatever you brought up the hill, and that you can set it down for a moment without fear that it will roll away. At some point you realize that your breathing has fallen into step with the precinct. And slowly, out a little longer, the same way a lamp pulls air when the door is open and does not smoke. The narrow things inside the wide thing, all of them learning to keep a kind company with one another. You have not spoken yet to anyone about your question. It is not time. You have washed, you have arranged an offering. You have learned the way the walls prefer footsteps to sound. And you have watched a priest do something simple with such attention that you did not think to measure the minutes. This is what the mountain wanted. Not thunder, not splendor, just the slow gathering of a room and a mind until they become one. When you go back in, the curtain still hangs. The bowl of water still shows the same small circle where the surface remembers the last breath that touched it. The laurel rests where it rested before. A hand gestures toward a bench, and you sit. Your hands learn where to be. Your head finds a position that does not trouble the neck. The stone holds the cool you need. From somewhere a bell offers a note that lives and then forgets to live. No words have been promised, and none are demanded. Yet you feel something like a page being turned somewhere beyond the reach of sight. The day has prepared itself. The mountain has woken. The question has not been told to come. It has been invited. And your breath, which is the oldest attendant in any temple, moves on its own timetable, uncoerced, even like the approach of an answer that has learned good manners. The path does not begin at the gate. It begins at the water. A narrow thread leaves the mountainside and gathers itself into a trough polished by hands. People arrive in ones and twos, as if drawn by the same sentence spoken at different times, and they stand without pushing. The spring does not glare. It presents a small, exact surface that holds the sky like a quiet promise. Fingers are dipped. Brow, lips, and the inner wrists are touched and cooled. A ribbon is lowered, drawn up, and laid along the palms so drops can decide where to fall. The smell here is clean stone, green laurel, and something faintly sweet. Honey from a cake unwrapped nearby, or the ghost of fennel dried against the wall. Nobody hurries. The water keeps its own rhythm and lends it to anyone who will borrow it. A woman unties the cord on a small jar of oil and tips only enough to sheen the surface of the bowl. The oil spreads like a thought that refuses to break into pieces. She watches it for a moment, not to find meaning, only to let sight get used to the fact that even still water moves. At her feet, the paving shows a shallow channel that guides what overflows back to the spring's first mouth, a kindness taught into the ground so that nothing here has to work alone. A priest passes, not to supervise, but to turn a ladle so its lip will not bruise the basin. He sets a laurel sprig where a laurel sprig belongs, and then stands aside, the way a doorkeeper might stand aside for the day itself. The sacred way rises from the water as if it had been persuaded to become a road. Blocks lie easy and exact. Their edges teach one another how to be square. The slope tightens, but never rudely. On the right, a low parapet holds back a terrace of thyme and rock rose. On the left, a rank of treasuries keeps its faces ordered, small, careful houses for gifts the city-states have sent. Their purpose is not to boast. It is to remind the mind that gratitude occupies space. Bronze fragments are set in niches, a hand once holding a lyre string, the curve of a shield rim, a tripod foot that still remembers fire. Inscriptions travel along stone like tidy vines. They do not shout. They record a name, a town, a winter survived, a vow kept. Every few dozen steps the path rests in a landing. The body thanks it without speaking. Travelers set down a chest for a breath, lift it again, and carry on. Children notice repeating things. The way lamp brackets are always set 3 handbreadths below a lintel. The way each drainstone lines up with a seam in the paving. The way the laurel planted in a pot has been tied in the same neat knot at each door. They point these patterns out in low voices and return to walking with the gravity of people entrusted with a route. Somewhere above, a bell for the hour yields a single note. It lives and goes, and the hill folds it into the ordinary air. Before the temple threshold stands a shallow table for the safe gifts. Bread with sesame seeds pressed into its skin, a wedge of white cheese under a fig leaf, a comb of honey cut square and patient, a bunch of grapes with dust that looks like twilight. A man lays a small cake down and smooths the ribbon until it knows how to lie. He steps back and does not look again. A girl arrives with a little woven basket of barley. She scatters a pinch from her right hand and waits for nothing to happen, because what she wanted has already happened. The hand learned the measure, and the ground accepted it. A priest sets a brazier nearer the door and adds a pinch of pale incense. Smoke rises and then goes sideways. An invisible window is opened somewhere to teach it that a room should be scented, not drowned. The washing returns inside as a quiet echo of the spring. A shallow bowl rests on a stand next to a folded cloth, and the cloth waits without thirst. Those who serve today touch the bowl, then the cloth, then the bowl again, as cooks do when they keep a bench clean without thinking. Rushes on the floor swallow the sound of sandals. The air tends to a temperature that belongs to people rather than stone. Light comes from the right and leaves on the left, the way a reader's gaze might travel across a line and into the margin. Along a wall, tools for attention lie in their order. A bell the size of an orange, a knife with an olive wood handle, a basket of ribbons sorted by shade, a scroll case wrapped in a thong wound twice. Order here is not decoration, it is hospitality. From time to time, the curtain beyond the inner room stirs the width of a breath. You do not see the tripod, but you feel how its 3 legs teach each other to be steady. A bronze bowl near it holds water that is almost still. A laurel branch rests along the rim with the ease of a hand that has done this before. Someone passes with a clay cup and sets it where a cup should be set. Someone else adjusts a lamp so the flame's oval remembers to burn without smoke. A priest lowers his head and lifts it again. Nothing changes, and everything deepens a degree. The question you brought begins to shrink into the shape of a sentence that can be asked in a room where nothing is asked loudly. Back outside, the path edges a view that is generous without insisting on being admired. Olive groves sit in long rows that make their own quiet music. A far ridge holds itself like a certainty you don't need to check. The road you climbed appears as a pale thread that forgets to look hard. An old man sits where he has sat for years, on a stone that has learned his weight, and mends the strap of a small chest with a needle that has learned his hand. He does not look at the temple. He looks at the strap. When the thread comes through, he ties it, bites it shorter, and rubs the end to soothe its temper. A child near him counts the columns and gets to the same number every time, which is the child's way of agreeing with the builders. When the sun climbs, the spring does not change its mind. It gives the same measure it gave at dawn. People who passed earlier return to touch the water again, not because they are unclean, but because the body likes to acknowledge threshold after threshold with the same simple act. A ribbon that was dipped and laid along a palm is now tied where it will be easy to loosen. A laurel sprig that was resting becomes a laurel sprig that is carried. A cake that was offered becomes part of a row of cakes, and the row teaches each cake how to be modest. Every small movement returns to the spring. Every small movement returns to the path. When it is time to go in, the door remembers how to open without a sound. Shadows make an architecture of their own inside the walls. Air smells of warm clay, clean wool, and the kind of smoke that feels like a polite tutor. Your feet know where to stand because the rushes arrange themselves that way. A hand gestures toward a bench, and you sit. The bowl of water holds the last small circle the surface remembers. The laurel rests without rehearsal. The bell is still and orange, quiet, whole, waiting. No one says the word begin. You understand that the beginning is already underway and has been since the first hand touched the spring. Your breathing agrees without being asked. A place like this teaches you to notice doors long before you reach them. One lies in the slope itself. The way the sacred way straightens, then narrows, then lets you breathe on a landing that feels deliberate. Another waits in the body, shoulders softening, hands emptying themselves of whatever they carried too far. The clearest threshold, though, is small and green. A sprig of laurel rests on a shallow tray beside a bowl of water. When the priest nods, you touch leaf to water, then touch brow and lips, and set the sprig back, cooler now, as if it had agreed to share its steadiness with you. The bowl holds a ring that grows, fades, and returns. The ring is only water remembering that it was touched. Stone lightens by a shade. The mind does too. A bell gives one round note and forgets to ring again. The first room arranges calm the way a scribe arranges a page. Brushes keep footsteps small. Lamps burn to an oval that doesn't smoke. Along the low bench, everything sits where the hand expects it to be. A folded cloth, a clean knife with an olive wood handle, a basket of narrow ribbons wound in patient coils, a little bronze bell the size of an orange, a slender scroll tied with a thong that knows 2 turns are enough. Nothing is hidden, nothing is performed. The priest moves like someone reading a familiar line without speaking it aloud. He sets a cake among cakes, white, with a dust of sesame, and it ceases to be your offering and becomes an offering, which is the same thing, said more gently. You breathe in through the nose and out a little longer, and the room rewards you by seeming to grow larger without needing any more space. Beyond another lintel, the light falls from the right and leaves on the left, as if it had read somewhere that this is how attention prefers to travel. A shallow brazier gives off a thread of sweet smoke, laurel leaf and a pinch of barley, and the thread rises, bends once, and forgets to be dramatic. You can hear the dry whisper of a broom in a side passage and the small, exact sound of a jar lid settling into a proper seat. In a corner, a bowl of water admits that it is not quite still. A laurel branch rests along its rim as easily as a hand on a familiar shoulder. A bronze tripod is only suggested by shadow where a curtain moves the width of a breath. You do not need to see more. The room has already told you what matters: steadiness, sequence, and the kind of silence that has learned its manners. The priest brings laurel to you now, not as a decoration, but as a tool. You take the sprig by the woody end and hold it where a pulse runs, the same way a reader lays a finger along a line so the eye will not hurry. Laurel in these rooms is not thunder's tree, it is attention's. A leaf brushed lightly along the lips reminds them to choose fewer words. A leaf tapped once against the brow reminds thought to become narrower without tightening. The priest shows how to make a small wreath that is not a crown so much as a promise. 2 lengths of narrow ribbon crossed, the laurel bound in a single loop, the knot set to the side where fingers can find it later. He does not fasten it, he offers it, and you set it in your lap as if it were a note the room wrote to you. Outside, the mountain keeps its slow vocabulary. Time, stone, olive, wind taught to walk instead of run. A boy at the spring dips a cup for an old woman and holds it until she finishes, then tilts the last drop back to where it began. A porter eases a chest down, checks the seal pressed into wax, and stands a moment with his palm on the lid, not guarding it, simply seeing it. A line of ants negotiates a crumb of honey and decides in neat order how to carry it. The sacred way takes 3 turns and arranges people so no one must pass too near another's question. When they meet, they nod in a way that says both, "I see you," and "I will not step inside the circle you are drawing." Laurel shadows, pale stone, the small medicine of cold water on the inside of the wrist. Within again, the curtain stirs and steadies. Nothing announces itself. Someone adjusts a lamp. The flame settles into an even oval. Someone lays a strip of wool across a low rail and smooths it once with a thumb. The priest returns to you with a bowl and a cloth. You wet your fingers and touch brow and lips, not as a rule you must obey, but as a way to agree with the room. The laurel wreath lies where you placed it, and because you placed it there, it has become part of the order. Object, cloth, bowl, breath. The knife glints once, idle, clean, useful, quiet. From a side table, he takes a small tablet of wax, soft with heat, and presses the corner of a seal into it. Only a square, only 2 neat lines, then sets the tablet aside. You do not know what it records. It is enough to know that the day is keeping track of itself without asking you to keep track of it. Now the threshold is only a change in the way you sit. Feet placed flat, hands resting where they can be still without being told to. Eyes lowered enough to let the edges soften, raised enough to know where you are. The priest does not offer instruction. He stands to one side, neither in front of you nor behind. From somewhere, a side alcove, perhaps, the smallest bell gives a single note that seems to arrive from the same place as a thought you were about to have. The laurel wreath is light in your lap. The bowl of water holds the faintest ring from the last breath that passed over it. The curtain waits without impatience. The temple is ready in the same way a page is ready. Room for lines, room for margins, room for a pause that will carry the weight of the next word without strain. You are not being asked to cross anything dramatic. You are being invited to notice that you already have. The first room settles you the way a palm settles a piece of cloth before folding it. Light comes in from high and to the right, washing the plastered wall in a calm that looks intentional. The rushes underfoot swallow small sounds and let only the dignified ones pass. A sandal set down, a ribbon drawn through fingers, the faint clink of bronze somewhere further in. On a bench, objects line themselves with the courtesy of guests who arrived early and chose the right seats. A shallow bowl filled to the same circle each morning. A folded square of linen that remembers corners. A little bronze bell you could cover with your hand. A knife with an olive wood handle that glints once and then decides to behave. Nothing here asks for admiration. Everything asks for attention that does not need to be named. Beyond a lintel, a second room holds the day at a lower volume. A brazier the size of a plate breathes a thin thread of sweet smoke, and the thread climbs just far enough to remind the nose of laurel and barley before it finds a path sideways and disappears. In a niche, a clay jar keeps water that has learned to be almost still. A sprig of laurel rests across the rim, as if it were remembering the feel of a wrist. A curtain hangs where the room narrows, its fabric dense enough to pretend it's secrecy, yet light enough to move when anyone with right to be there passes. The air is warmer by a degree. A scribe seated at a narrow table lifts his brush once, sets it to a small strip of wax once, and then dries that single mark with a pinch of sand, the way someone ties a knot on a thought so it will not wander. The people who serve here perform no complicated magic. They keep useful company with simple things. A woman checks the tripod with the same care a cook gives a three-legged pot, pressing gently on each leg until the whole considers itself steady. A man tends the lamps, trimming each wick to an oval that burns without smoke and lifting the lamp a finger's width to seat it where heat will not mar the stone. A ribbed dish holds pinches of incense sorted by tint rather than scent, and when he nudges the dish 3 inches to the left, it is not fussiness. It is a memory of the way air moves in this room once the noon wind wakes. The doorway back to the court is kept open the width of a hand, so the light will arrive like water poured rather than sloshed. In every act, the aim is the same: to lay out a path that thought can walk without catching its robe on a nail. You are shown a place to sit that is not quite a chair and not quite a bench, the kind of seat that teaches a back how to be long. The priest who guided you in speaks seldom, and when he does, his words choose round sounds that do not snag on the ear. He touches the bowl. You touch the water and lift your hand to brow and lips and the inside of the wrist. He sets a narrow ribbon across your lap and leaves it there as if it were a line on a page offered to your own writing. He lifts a sprig of laurel and rests it across your fingers, palm up, an invitation more than a rule. Somewhere behind the curtain, a small shift happens. Fabric stirs. Wood creaks the width of a heartbeat. The tripod admits its presence the way a well admits depth by how it keeps its echo. The room does not darken. It clarifies. Questions in this place are not thrown like spears. They are lowered into the water like a bucket and raised slowly and looked at in the light that room, an hour, and breath agree to provide. The priest shows you how to make a narrow wreath. 2 leaves, the ribbon crossed, the knot set off to the side rather than at the back, so it will not teach your neck to think about it. He does not place it on you. He places it near you. You lift it when you are ready and lay it where it will not trouble your scalp. And in that small act, your mind learns the larger habit the temple prefers: to carry a thing lightly enough that it can be set down and lifted again without announcement. Around you, movements rhyme with your breath. A lamp is adjusted and your ribs widen. A bell suggests a single note, and your exhale lingers an inch longer down your chest before returning. When you look up, the wall teaches you the temple's handwriting: measured shadow, restrained ornament, a band of paint that remembers laurel and river without needing to imitate either. The scribe opens a small case and produces a strip that someone else brought earlier in the day: a name, a place, a sum of grain promised if the sea cooperates. He does not read it aloud. He smooths it with 2 fingers and sets it to one side, as if making room in a queue. You understand that your coming here is not a demand for an audience. It is a decision to stand in line with people who learned before you how to ask for help without insisting on spectacle. Somewhere a shoe is removed and set heel against wall with the strap folded over it to keep the leather honest. Somewhere a cough is swallowed before it grows to a sound, and the room rewards the effort with nothing more than ease. The curtain yields enough to admit the suggestion of an inner geometry, the tripod's 3 legs agreeing to be a circle, the bowl agreeing to be a horizon, the little breath of warm air where someone has passed and left a wake as narrow as a line of ink. You are not asked to see more than this. Attention that tries to pry is the opposite of the attention the temple cultivates. Instead, the priest offers something soft to the ear, a line of verse that is not a prophecy, but a way to strike a tuning fork inside the mind. Leave doors as you found them. Pour water as if it remembers the spring. Let words be few and full. He says the words once, and the room says them back without sound. Your question begins to arrange itself without your help. It sheds adjectives. It loses the urgency that made it look large. It becomes sentence-shaped, and then breath-shaped, and finally something like a small stone that sits comfortably in the palm. The priest sees this without looking at you directly. He sets a clay cup on the floor where it will not be knocked. He folds the linen once, and then once again to make a square the size of a hand, not because the cloth demanded folding, but because the act of folding answered a disorder that did not yet exist. He takes up the bell, considers it, and does not ring it. The decision to wait is itself part of the sound the bell will make when it is time. In another house, elsewhere on another day, a corridor like this would be a passage between rooms. Here it is the room. Here the moving and the waiting are the thing. The brazier breathes. The water keeps its calm surface and then, forgetting itself for a heartbeat, trembles into a single ring and grows still again. Shadows maintain their edges. A child in the outer court whispers to a dog and the dog sighs, and both sounds arrive in here as if carried on the back of a leaf. A thread snaps somewhere far away and is retied. The mountain tilts its light a degree toward afternoon. Your hands rest where they chose to rest. The weight on your shoulders becomes ordinary instead of personal. You do not yet know what will be said later or how it will be said, but you know that whatever is asked will be asked in a room whose first loyalty is to steadiness, and that this steadiness is already doing a portion of the answering for you. The curtain yields a hand's width, and the inner room becomes a drawing made of quiet lines. Bronze shows itself first, a tripod whose 3 legs bend like reed stalks and meet in a tight circle that would rather be called steady than strong. Each foot rests on a flat stone the size of a palm. The stones are level with the kind of confidence that comes only from long practice. Between the legs sits a low bowl of water that is almost, but not completely, still. Its surface holds a room-shaped oval of light that thickens when a lamp is moved and thins when a body passes. On a nearby rail, a fresh sprig of laurel has been laid with the stem toward the hand, and the leaves turned outward, their green dark as olives in evening. The air is warm by a degree, sweet with a thread of incense that rises, bends, and chooses a path sideways. Bronze curve, shallow water, soft lamp ovals, laurel quiet on wood. The woman who will sit, no crown, no display, enters as if she were crossing from a sentence into its margin. She does not hurry. She washes her hands again in the small bowl by the door, once for the fingers that touch containers and cords, once for the fingers that touch her own brow, and a third time for the space in which words will be shaped. A ribbon is set aside. A narrow strip of wool rests across her lap until it forgets to be noticed. She lifts the laurel, not to wear it like a conquest, but to hold it lightly, the way you hold a measuring string you mean to keep straight. Her breath is the room's metronome. In through the nose, out a little longer, with a stillness at the turn that teaches the ribs to understand patience. Lamp trimmed to a low oval. Floor rushes that swallow sound. Bronze that remembers hands. The tripod is not a throne. It is a stool with a purpose. A thick cushion lies across its circle so the body can be long without arguing with bone. When she lowers herself, she does it the way a person lowers a jar into a shelf made for that jar. Aligned, careful, certain. The laurel rests along the fingers of one hand. The other hand finds the rim of the bowl and learns it's cool. The water is there to remind the mouth what simplicity tastes like. The leaf is there to remind the head that the world has more kinds of steadiness than one. Nothing of theater intrudes. The brazier a few paces away offers one thin ribbon and no more. A bell the size of an orange lives and dies in one note, then returns to being metal under cloth. Beyond the curtain, the outer rooms continue their mild commerce. Footsteps placed well, a scroll moved and set down, a small cough smoothed back into the chest, and all of it arrives in here as a curve of air rather than a story. Before any answer is imagined, the priest gives the question a cleaner shape. He speaks it once, without decoration, as if reading a name correctly. Not too loud, not too soft, with an honesty that lets the room itself agree that the words are true enough to be carried. He sets a pinch of barley on the brazier, a gesture that belongs equally to mouths that eat and minds that ask. And then he steps aside in a way that places no shadow across the woman's lap. The scribe does not approach. He sits with the wax tablet already warmed beneath his palm, so the stylus will not tear the surface. He will write later, and only what can be remembered without strain. The bowl's oval holds steady. The tripod's 3 legs share their duty without needing to be told. Laurel leaf, barley scent, bronze leg, water light. Breath becomes the room's engine. The woman lets her exhale grow longer by half a finger's width each time until the body forgets urgency and remembers rhythm. She does not close her eyes because there is no need to shut the world out. She softens her gaze so the edges meet one another in a more generous way. A word might rise and then decide not to. A small sound might be made in the throat and then laid aside like a tool that was not needed after all. Now and then the laurel touches her wrist. The cool of the water touches her fingertips. The lamp's oval grows and narrows as oil learns its path through the wick. There is no trance here, no spectacle, only a carefully made agreement between breathing, posture, room, question, and time. The longer she keeps the agreement, the less the question looks like a stone and the more it looks like a path. At some point that cannot be scheduled, the first answer arrives as a direction rather than a decree. It is not shouted, and it is not hurried. The voice is hers, but shaped by the room's manners. Shorter phrases, small images that behave, comparisons that make sense to people who live with fields, boats, and household vessels. Leave doors as you found them. Pour like spring, not like river. Ask the elder of figs, the younger of ladders. The priest does not interrupt to settle meanings. He repeats the lines in the same tone, so they can be held in the air long enough to show their weight. When the bowl's oval quivers, it is because a breath has ticked the surface, not because the world has broken its rules. The laurel's leaves are lifted once and set down again. The tripod gives nothing, takes nothing, simply holds. The scribe writes only after the room has heard each line twice. He sets down the words in a patience taught by his tools, strokes that remember to return to themselves, letters that are fully made before the next begins. If a word arrives with a turn he cannot fit, he leaves a blank and draws a quiet mark to return, because accuracy is a courtesy owed to both question and answer. The priest, for his part, listens for the place where a sequence seems to close, the way a craftsman listens for the note that means a lid has found its seat. When it comes, he does not force more speech. He gives a pinch of incense to the brazier, tips the brazier half a hand's width so the smoke will learn the way to the corner, and stands still until the room's breath grows ordinary again. The woman lifts from the tripod as if standing were merely the next gentle line of a sentence already understood. Afterward is part of the work. The laurel is returned to the rail stem first, so the leaves will keep their shape. The bowl is refreshed. The first oval of light forms again and waits. The stylus is warmed by the scribe's palm and drawn once across the wax to smooth a ridge. The priest speaks the lines back to the questioner without chasing meanings that are not ready to be caught. He adds only the smallest of measures from his own cupboard, a reminder to take the long road if the short one is lost its stones, a suggestion to choose the second witness when the first is someone who is loved too much to be trusted with ease. He does not bless, he does not command. He returns the question shaped into something that can be carried down the hill without spilling. The woman who sat does not become a statue when she rises. She becomes a person again, and that is the point. Her shoulders release the duty they held, the way a shelf releases the weight of a jar when the jar is lifted correctly. She rinses her hands, not because they are unclean, but because the act returns what was borrowed. She touches the laurel once in thanks, not to the plant, but to the habit of steadiness it stood in for. Someone opens the door the width of a hand, and the light changes its mind about the floor. Rushes hush the step of the next person who will enter much later, when the room is ready to begin again. The tripod waits without appetite. The bowl waits without impatience. The air returns to the temperature of people and good stone. Outside, the precinct answers with its own slow chorus. The spring's thread keeps its appointment. A lamp in a doorway is turned down a finger's width. A porter corrects a strap. A child counts columns to the same faithful number. Nothing applauds. Nothing flares. The mountain holds its light as if it had been taught to carry it, and the path knows where it goes. If you stand in the court and breathe the way the room taught you, slow in, slower out, you will feel how a question becomes smaller not by being dismissed, but by being placed among things that are well made and well tended. In that order, the mind falls asleep the honest way, not abandoned, not commanded, simply accompanied by the tripod and the breath until both are no longer needed for a while. A good answer begins with a question that knows how to sit still. The priest brings you to a low table whose wood has learned the shine of hands. On it lie the simple tools of thought made visible. A small wax tablet warmed to softness, a stylus with one end pointed and the other broad for smoothing, a narrow ribbon the color of laurel bark, and a reed case that will carry what you write. The scribe sets the tablet before you and waits without leaning. He does not ask what troubles you. He asks how many words you think are necessary. You try a sentence in your head, and it arrives wearing too many buttons. He turns the tablet a finger's width, lifts the smoothing end of the stylus, and draws one gentle pass that leaves a clean field. Once, he says, for what is asked. Once more, for what would be enough. You begin with the wide version, and the room edits you kindly. You write when, and the letters stand straight. You write where, and the stylus leaves a small hiss no louder than a moth. You reach for why, and the scribe's palm rests near the bottom edge of the tablet, not to stop you, but to lend the page weight. In another place, another day, you might try to pack the whole river into a jar. Here, you choose the mouth of the stream instead and leave the rest to run. When you finish the first line, the priest reads it back in a voice calibrated to the stone. He removes the ornaments your mind tied on without permission, the way a gardener snips extra twine. You smooth the surface and write the smaller version, a single line that could be said while a door is closing and still be understood. There is a brief right for questions that will be carried inside. The priest lifts a tiny sprinkle of barley and lets it fall into a brazier. The smell is not food, it is memory. He wets a sprig of laurel and touches it to the corners of the tablet as if drawing a simple frame, then lays the sprig across your wrist so your pulse can read it. A boy arrives with a shallow bowl of water from the spring and holds it while you touch the stylus to the surface and then to the wax, tracing the first letter again so the question knows it belongs to this place. The scribe ties the ribbon through the tablet's thong with a knot that will lie flat in a pocket and not tug. Nothing here is grand, and everything is exact. Order in this precinct prefers turns to crowds. When several petitioners arrive on the same day, the lot is drawn by a handful of smooth stones kept in a wooden bowl. Each stone carries the faintest cut that will catch a fingernail. 1 line, 2 lines, 3, and the bowl is turned slowly until the stones forget which is which. The priest asks you to place your hand in, take one, and keep it closed until you feel the weight as an ordinary thing rather than a decision. You open your fist and read the mark by touch first, sight second. Someone across the room does the same and nods without envy. The boy with the water sets the bowl down where bowls rest, and the room adds one quiet notch to its ledger of turns taken and kept. If the day requires a sign, it is taken in a manner that does not disturb anyone's breath. A goat led from a shaded pen is offered a dip of the spring. If the skin shivers, thought will proceed. If it does not, the hour belongs to ordinary work and questions learn a gentler patience. Today the water beads on the hair, and a small ripple runs along the skin like a yawn. The keeper strokes the animal's neck and leads it back, and the room thanks the sign by doing what it would have done anyway, only now with permission to call it auspicious. No trumpet, no crowding at the doorway, only a shared glance that says, "Good," and then returns to careful tasks. The priest shows you the twofold phrasing that helps a question carry itself. First, the version that asks, "What road is kind?" And second, the version that asks, "What should not be left behind?" The scribe writes each on a separate slip and places them side by side, his hand hovering above like a level. You listen to their weight in your mouth. One sounds like a hill taken directly. The other sounds like a path that skirts stones and still arrives. You choose the second to lead and the first to follow, because sleep prefers roads that keep their manners. The slips are rolled, tied with single knots, and set upright in a little reed cup so they will not forget they are companions. Attention is a kind of offering, and the temple receives it with the same simple gestures it uses for bread and honey. You stand, you wash your fingers in the basin, you touch brow and lips and the inside of the wrists, and then you sit again with your back long and your ribs remembering the metronome the room said earlier. The priest places the question you chose on a low stool between you and the curtain, not as a barrier, but as a reminder that words are better when they are given somewhere to rest before they travel. A single bell is lifted and let fall to its note, which rises, becomes the size of the room, and then thins without fraying. On the other side of the curtain, the tripod is not in a hurry to be a tripod. It is content to be 3 steady legs and a circle that understands duty. While you wait, the room rehearses its manners in small ways so your mind can copy them. A lamp wick is trimmed to an oval that will not smoke. A scroll is taken from its case and unfurled just enough to read the thread of the cord, then rolled again with the cord lying flat. A porter checks the seal on a little chest and runs a thumb along the wax to see if the mark held. The scribe smooths a line on the tablet he will use later, not to erase anything important, only to give the stylus a clean landing. All of this says, "Go on, but softly." All of this says, you do not have to carry the whole question by yourself. The table, the ribbon, the bowl, the breath, each has agreed to lift a corner. When the time comes to move, nothing needs announcing. The curtain shifts its weight the width of a leaf. The priest gathers the slips from the reed cup and sets them where the hand behind the curtain will find them without searching. He takes the tablet with your paired line, touches its thong to the water, and returns it to your palm, not as a possession, but as a steadying weight. You notice that the room has grown simpler by a degree, fewer edges, rounder sounds, light that prefers to be kind rather than bright. Your breathing, which has been practicing all along, is ready to be the road under the words. You have a question. It is smaller now, serviceable, and unafraid. The tripod waits with its patient circle. The bowl holds its oval of light. The laurel cools your wrist and says nothing at all, which is the best kind of help. The room does not announce the beginning. It allows it. The curtain settles into stillness. The bowl's oval of light holds true, and the tripod remembers its duty. The woman's breath has found the same slow count the lamps prefer. When she speaks, it is not as a trumpet but as a reed, clear enough to hear, narrow enough to carry. The priest stands where no shadow falls across her hands and repeats each phrase once, not louder, only steadier, so the words can learn their weight in the air before the scribe asks them to live on wax. The first lines arrive as directions rather than verdicts. Take the road that rises gently and returns the same way, she says, and the priest returns, the gentler road, and back by itself. Ask the elder of figs, the younger of ladders, she offers, and he answers, fruit for timing, youth for reach. No figure is named. No city is praised or warned. The phrases are built from things a house already knows. Doors, bowls, ropes, shade, the hour when shadows stand under their owners. It is the temple's way of making an answer that will not break in the carrying. From time to time, she leans a leaf of laurel against her wrist, as if borrowing its coolness to keep the words from heating into haste. The water in the low bowl does not ripple. It thickens its light by a degree and then thins it again, the way a thought swells and settles. Pour like the spring, not like the river, she says, and the priest repeats, spring, not flood. Choose the second witness if the first is loved, and he returns, second where love distorts. The scribe waits until each pairing has made the round trip through two voices and then writes, not as a collector of rare birds, but as a cook copying a recipe he will actually use. Images conspire gently until they seem to point the same way. Vessels are balanced. Knots are tied flat so they will not print their shape into skin. Doors are left as they were found. If the gate is high, touch the lintel and go under, she says. If the gate is low, touch your brow and bow. Nothing here pretends to omnipotence. The temple does not claim to stop storms. It claims to teach the small acts that borrow the weather's good manners. Send the message in the hour before bread, she says, and the priest answers, before hunger sharpens tempers. Weigh the coin, do not admire the shine. And he returns, wait first, then brightness. Once, only once, the voice lengthens into something like a small story, as if the answer wanted to show how it behaves inside a life. A man had 2 jars, she says, one that sweated and one that did not. He filled the dry jar first because he liked the way it stayed clean, but his road was long, and the jar that sweated kept its cool. He reached the hill and wished he had chosen thirst's friend. The priest does not explain. He repeats the lines as lines, leaving the hearers to decide which of their jars has been choosing the wrong heat. The scribe makes a small mark in the wax, not a gloss, just a reminder to space the sentences so this one can breathe. Questions do not stand still while they are being answered. They turn their heads to see if the answers fit. The priest listens as much to the silence between phrases as to the phrases themselves. When the room's attention slackens by a thread, he adds barley to the brazier and tilts it half a hand's breadth so the thin smoke learns a path toward a corner that will not trouble lungs. The woman's breath returns to the longer exhale. Bind the bundle with 1 cord. Carry it with 2, she says. Count the steps between landings, then forget the number. Do not oil a hinge that was meant to creak. And the priest, smiling with his voice more than his mouth, gives it back unchanged. Now the answer begins to close itself in the way a lid finds its seat. The lines grow shorter. Repetitions come in pairs that feel like knots being finished. Ask twice, she says. Pay once. Pay once, he says, and ask twice if you must. Dine with plainly salted food before you choose the guest list. Clean the knife before you praise the carver. The scribe's stylus moves without scratching. He smooths only where the wax rises in a ridge and leaves the rest alone. He is making not a speech, but a page someone could read by lamplight when the wind turns in the night. It is the priest, not the room, who chooses the moment to be done. He hears the cadence resolve, the way a craftsman hears when a lid's last turn has brought threads into line. He does not ring the hour for 1 phrase more. He says, these are enough for carrying. And the woman on the tripod lifts the laurel from her wrist, lays it back on the rail stem first, and lets her hands forget the rim of the bowl. She sits for 3 breaths the way a lamp rests after being pinched lower, and then she rises as people rise from ordinary chairs. The tripod becomes furniture again, which is a mark of good instruments. When they are not in use, they do not insist upon themselves. Afterward is quiet work. The priest speaks the gathered lines back to you, not in the order they came, but in the order a walk would take. Doorstep, road, gate, errand, return. He does not press meanings into them like stamps. He leaves their edges gently open so they can fit the grain of your day. If you ask, but which elder? He points at figs. If you ask, which hinge? He says, the one that warns instead of sings. He refuses the drama of certainty and offers the peace of craft. If tomorrow changes the weather, he adds, change your hat, not your head. The scribe warms the tablet under his palm, breathes once to soften a letter that would rather be hard, and ties the thong with a flat knot that will not print through fabric. He writes a small mark in the corner that is neither a name nor a number, just the workshop's way of remembering the hour without telling it to anyone else. The priest touches the ribbon with fingertips that smell faintly of laurel and barley and places the tablet in your hands as if returning a tool you left here earlier. Carry it as far as the landing, he says. Read it there, not here. It is the temple's last service, to send the answer out of its own air so it can prove itself in yours. When you step back into the outer room, everything you left is as you left it. Rushes level, lamp ovals low, the bell the size of an orange, the knife that glints and then behaves. The spring outside has not paused. You will pass it and touch the water without ceremony. The sacred way will offer the same landings at the same intervals. A child will be counting columns and reach the same faithful number. You will think, perhaps, of jars and heat, of hinges meant to warn, of second witnesses when love makes the first too bright. And as the mountain's light widens into afternoon, the answer will do what good answers do. It will grow lighter in the hand as it grows more useful, until it begins to feel less like an oracle and more like a habit you almost remember having all along. Outside the inner room, the precinct keeps a second kind of calm, the kind made by objects that have learned to wait. Along a shallow table, the safe gifts rest shoulder to shoulder, barley sprinkled in a thin crescent, a small cake dusted with sesame, a comb of honey cut square, a jug of oil sealed with wax and tied with a single flat knot. A temple attendant moves among them without rustling the air, turning a ribbon so it lies true, setting a grape cluster so the bloom on the skins will not rub away. None of it is grand. All of it is exact. The mountain lends the scene a breeze that smells of time. The offerings add a note of sweetness that never thinks to be strong. On the terrace, the treasuries keep their polite faces, small houses built by cities that wish to say thank you without shouting. Bronze fragments live in niches, the curve of a shield rim, a lyre string's hand, a tripod foot that still remembers fire. Carved words travel along stone like tidy vines. Names, towns, winters survived, vows kept. Pilgrims walk slowly past these things the way you would walk past family portraits, not to admire themselves in them, but to be reminded that many lives have stood where they stand and found their questions becoming bearable. A child taps a toe on a paving seam, counts columns, loses the number, and is content. When a visitor leaves a token, the gesture is small enough to keep company with breath. A woman unthreads a narrow blue ribbon from her wrist and ties it, not to a statue, but to a simple peg set for such ties. She smooths the knot once, then lets her hand fall. A farmer sets down a little pinaxe, a painted plaque no larger than his palm, a sprig, a boat, a door, pictures drawn the way a memory chooses what to keep. A traveler places a pebble from a far river among other pebbles from other rivers, and the pile gains one more quiet story. Laurel, ribbon, clay, stone, materials that weather well because they never pretended to be anything else. Inside, the record keeper sits at a low table whose wood has learned the shine of hands. He warms a wax tablet with his palm so the stylus will glide, writes a name and a brief line that could be read by lamplight without squinting, then lifts a pinch of sand to dry the trace. Next to the tablet lies a bundle of bamboo slips, tied with cord for the notes that want to travel farther than wax prefers. Nothing here is secret. Everything is legible at human speed. When he finishes a line, he speaks it once to the air so the room can agree with the shape of it before it joins the others in the reed case. The Pythia's words, already spoken and repeated, are gathered without ceremony. The record keeper copies the few that need carrying, Short, balanced, workable at the scale of a household. Doors, bowls, ropes, shade. An attendant adds a brush mark in cinnabar to say the hour is past and the page is settled. If a blank space remains, it is left as a kindness to the meaning that may arrive later on the road. The tablet's thong is tied with a flat knot that will not print through cloth. The slip bundle is looped once, not twice, so it will open without tugging. Even the cords have learned their manners. Some tokens are returned rather than left. A laurel sprig that cooled a wrist goes back to the rail stem first, so the leaves will keep their shape. The small wool fillet that kept a thought narrow is folded and set by the bowl for the next quiet hour. A clay cup is rinsed and turned mouth down so dust will not learn its lip. This borrowing and returning is not thrift. It is the precinct's way of teaching that steadiness belongs to everyone who keeps it in use. Now and then a seal is asked to witness what was done. The attendant presses a square of script into a wafer of soft clay where a chord crosses a stopper. Shallow, neat, legible. Not a threat, a promise. This jar will weigh what the ledger says. This bundle holds the words that were heard. A second sign, no more than a small diagonal stroke, sits by the first to say the temple has read its own mark and agrees with it. The clay dries in the shade while the day moves on. No trumpet announces it. The seal does its work by being itself. Before anyone turns to the road down, the record keeper offers a last, simple service. He places the tablet or slip in the visitor's hands as if returning a tool that was left on the bench. He does not explain meanings that are not ready to be caught. He arranges the phrases in the order a walk would take: doorstep, gate, errand, return. If the listener asks which elder of figs, he points at season. If the listener asks which hinge should creak, he says, the one that warns. Then he closes the reed case and lets the quiet make the point more gently than speech could do. Even the spring keeps its share of records. A sheen of oil circles a coin of light and breaks into fine lace where a hand touches, then heals. A ribbon darkens, lightens, darkens again as new wrists repeat the same cooling gesture. The trough remembers palms the way wax remembers a line. A temple attendant turns the ladle so its lip will not bruise the basin and steps aside, the way a doorkeeper might step aside for the day itself. The sacred way waits with the same landings at the same intervals. A bell for the hour gives one note and forgets to linger. When you are ready to go, nothing rushes you. The token you leave stays modest among its neighbors. The words you carry weigh as much as a small loaf and no more. The mountain gives you time, stone, olive, and a wind that has been taught to walk, not run. The precinct keeps your place for someone else without touching your name. And as your feet find the first descent, the record you will rely on most has already begun to write itself in muscle and breath. And slowly, out a little longer, doors left as they were found, the kind of attention that makes even a short road behave. Departure at Delphi is made of small permissions. A temple attendant returns your wax tablet and ties its thong with a flat knot that will not tug at cloth. Another sets a laurel sprig on the rail stem first, so the leaves keep their shape, then turns the little brazier so the last thread of smoke learns a path toward the open court. The Pythia has gone to wash her hands. The tripod is only furniture again. Your question feels lighter, like a tool that has already been used once and now knows your grip. No bell marks the moment. The room simply loosens by a degree, and the rushes underfoot remember they were laid to soften steps. Omens here are not thunderclaps, they are manners in the air. At the doorway a draft carries the brazier's sweetness along the left wall rather than the right, and the attendant nods as if to say, take the side that breathes easier. On the terrace a laurel leaf detaches and lands with its stem pointing downhill, and an old porter, without raising his voice, says, good, let the road take the first thought. A swallow writes one arc over the court and perches, facing the sacred way rather than away from it. No one chases meanings. The The place has taught everyone to let helpful signs arrive and then become ordinary again. Before you step into sun, the spring asks for one last touch. Water cools brow, lips, and the inside of the wrists. A ribbon darkens and then forgets it was ever wet. A ladle is turned so its lip will not bruise the basin. You breathe in, and the smell is clean stone with a thin sweetness under it from honey that was cut square earlier and carried away. Behind you, a quiet click. A seal pressed into soft clay where a cord crosses a jar. The impression is shallow and legible, not a warning, but a promise. The record keeper speaks your tablet's first line once, just to the air, and lets it go as if setting a boat into slow water. The first landing down is a test that asks nothing complicated. Does the answer walk without wobbling? Shade falls where it fell on the way up. The treasuries keep their faces polite and exact. You pass the painted pinax with its little boat. Someone has straightened its cord so the picture hangs true. A child counts columns and reaches the same faithful number. A sandal strap is tightened, then loosened half a hole when the foot remembers swelling in warm light. The path does its teaching in furniture-sized gestures: parapet, step, bench of shade, so the mind can copy them. Support, pause, continue. Midway down, an attendant who minds the lot sits on a low stool and shakes the wooden bowl once, for anyone who needs courage in a small dose. You do not draw again. You have your hour. Still, you listen to the soft clack as the stones remember how to forget which is which, and the sound makes a kind of spine in your back. A mule bell from the road below gives one round note and chooses silence. A breeze frets at your sleeve and then smooths it, as if rehearsing the correction you will give your own day when it snags. The answer you carry begins to feel less like a sentence and more like a tempo. At the lowest terrace, the precinct offers one more kindly pattern. Bread is shared in thin slices, salted plainly. Oil is poured in a ring that touches itself. A cup of water is passed with the handle always on the same side, so hands do not have to search. A temple attendant shows you how to fold your tablet's thong under itself so it will not catch in your belt. Begin with the smallest door, she says, not as a prophecy, only as craft. And you realize the lines you heard inside are arranged to scale. Doorstep, gate, errand, return. You could try one before noon without changing the rest of your day. As you cross the precinct line, the last omens are road-shaped. A cart's wheel avoids a puddle without splashing. A thread in your sleeve asks to be pulled, then chooses to lie still when pinched and tucked. A farmer coming up with an empty jar steps aside before either of you must choose who yields, and both of you nod, as if agreeing on a number neither speaks. This is how Delphi sends people home, not with a blaze, but with 3 or 4 useful coincidences that can stand upright without supervision. When you look back, the mountain does not beckon or dismiss. It holds its light as if taught to carry it. The spring's thread keeps its appointment. The laurel, the bowl, the tripod, the quiet, none of them follow you, but all of them have put their manners into your pockets. The sacred way forgets to be steep once your feet learn its landings. If you try a line from the tablet aloud, softly, so as not to bruise it, your breath finds the same count the lamps preferred, in through the nose, out a little longer. And if you need an omen on the plane, you will know how to make one modestly. Straighten the picture, pour like the spring, leave the door as you found it. The rest of the road will take the hint. Evening gathers like a careful hand closing a book without disturbing the page. The light on Parnassus thins from honey to linen. Stone forgets its glare and learns a softer grammar. A temple attendant turns each lamp down to an oval that does not smoke, then pinches one completely and lets the warm metal cool in his palm. The record keeper ties the day's slips with a flat knot that will not tug at cloth, sets the bundle in its reed case, and rests the brush across the rim so the bristles will sleep straight. Somewhere deeper in the precinct, rushes take back their hush. Doors settle on their lintels. The curtain that hid the tripod all afternoon hangs without a thought. as plain as breath at rest. Outside, the spring keeps its appointment in a darker key. A ribbon touches water and returns with a line of chill that the wrist stores like a small, private moon. The ladle is turned so its lip won't bruise the basin. The paving, which shone at noon, now holds only a quiet sheen where stars begin to practice themselves. The laurel by the rail has learned night's color. Its leaves seem thicker, as if they had decided to keep what they know. Down the slope, treasuries turn to silhouettes with polite edges, their inscriptions making a softer sense when read by memory instead of eye. A swallow writes one last loop and folds itself under the eave that has remembered it all summer. The Pythia has washed her hands and eased the narrow fillet from her brow. Laurel rests along the rail, stem first, leaves outward, the way steadiness is returned when it has finished its work. An attendant lifts the small brazier and tips the last thread of sweetness toward the open court, teaching the smoke to leave as courteously as it arrived. The tripod is only furniture again, 3 legs that agree to keep their circle while no one asks anything of them. If you stand in the doorway here, the room shows you its true subject at last. Not ceremony, not speech, but proportion. Distances that spare the voice. Shadows that know where to hold. A bowl that is almost still. A door that prefers to be opened once. On the terrace, omphalos and column pass into outline. Cypress stand like tall, good sentences. Olives keep their rounder grammar. The sacred way, which asked for your calves this morning, now behaves like a long exhale. Landings appear as small, square favors exactly where you might want them, even in the dark. A porter checks a strap by feel alone, finds the flat not lying as it should, and lets his hand fall. A child counts columns in a whisper and reaches the same faithful number. Someone farther down answers with a whisper of their own, which might be a number or might be the night returning the count. The mountain keeps its light the way a careful reader keeps their place. Low voices move like moths. Bread, oil, water. The offers are short, the refusals shorter, and the acceptances shorter still. A traveler sets a pebble from a far river with the other pebbles from other rivers, and, because it is dark, does not admire the placement. He trusts the pile and turns away. Someone straightens a little pinaxe by touch, a boat painted no larger than a hand. The cord lies true. The picture hangs square with the world. Wind learns to walk, not run. A bell for the hour gives one round note and refuses a second, as if to say, enough, the day knows what time it is. When the precinct makes ready for night, even its numbers grow quiet. The record keeper runs a thumb along the tied slips to feel for a page that wants smoothing and finds none. A final mark in cinnabar sits where it should, small as a seed, bright as a promise that does not need guarding. The door to the store of offerings is pulled to, not because anyone doubts the world, but because even good honey deserves a latch. The spring receives the last hand. The trough lies shining at its circle. The ladle's shadow becomes a straight line and then nothing. Stone cools. Air levels. Laurel keeps the thought it learned. If you step once more into the inner court, your feet remember the route without asking the eye to explain it. The curtain is just cloth. The tripod is just bronze. The bowl is just water reflecting a pale oval where a lamp once lived. Yet the place is not empty. It is full of what it has practiced all day: steadiness, sequence, room for a question to shrink until it can be carried. You could speak your line aloud here in the dark, and the stones would understand you without needing to answer. You could choose not to speak, and they would understand that too. The precinct keeps you without holding you. When it is time to leave, the sacred way gives you back to the night by gentle degrees. First, a landing under your palm where the parapet meets warm air. Then, a turn that puts olives on your left so the faintest breeze can accompany your cheek. Then, the scent of time learned from the day, released like a story that has finished telling itself. At the gate, an attendant lifts a hand, not a farewell, only a line drawn straight so the rest of the sentence can pass. Behind you, the lamp ovals lower to embers. Ahead of you, the road forgets to be steep once your breath remembers its count, and softly, out a little longer. You do not need to look back, but if you do, the mountain does what it has done since long before names. It keeps the sky where it belongs and allows little lights to learn their places. The spring's thread goes on, unpersuaded by dark. Somewhere a dog sighs and goes to one side of a threshold, leaving the middle open. Somewhere a door is left exactly as it was found. The answer you carried up has arranged itself into steps going down. The last work is only to walk them. We close here. In a moment the screen will go dark, and plus 1 hour of ambient music will begin, low, steady, and simple, so the quiet can continue without words. Let your breath keep Delphi's rhythm, and softly, out a little longer. Sleep well.